Are you tired of dealing with JSON objects in OBS RAW? Always messing up with escaping stuff in the strings? Don't understand how to parse a response? Well, no more! Introducing new helper library for Streamer.Bot. It allows you to create simple C# structures with predefined fields, which you can easily access. Serializing and deserializing JSON was never easier. To install the library, you can grab the source code from my GitHub repo and build it. Or, if you trust me enough, just grab compiled DLL from the release page. Place it in DLL folder inside the Streamer.Bot folder, or any other place wherever you like. Just don't forget where you put it, because you will need to reference it in your C# code subactions. To use my library, you should be already familiar with OBS RAW and C# subaction. To use OBS RAW, we need request type, request data, and connection ID to where to send it. It returns a string, which represents a JSON object of response data. The library consists of structures corresponding to request and response data objects, and most of the types in them. Why not all of them? Well, it's practically impossible to get all of them because of the plugins. Each new plugin can add new types. Here you can see all namespaces. They correspond to categories in OBS WebSocket protocol. For example, you want to get scene item transform. So it's a request for scene items, and here it is, get scene item transform. So you need scene items namespace. When you send the request, you will need a structure corresponding to the request data. You need to take request type and add request data to it. In this case, you need get scene item transform request data. And for response data, request type plus response data. Get scene item transform response data. You can see it returns scene item transform type inside this response. All of these types are collected under the root namespace. Here you can see it and all of its fields. Let me show you some special cases. For example, get source filter under filters namespace. In its response data, you can see that filter settings is just a dictionary with string key and object as value. It's like that because each filter got its own list of settings, and you can't just create a single type for them. And as I already mentioned, plugins. They add even more variety. So be aware of this kind of stuff. Now let's see it in action. I will again use my favorite get and set scene item transform requests, which actually was the reason I even decided to create this library. So here I have my code. Here you can see required namespaces, one for Newton.json library, it comes preloaded with Streamer.Bot and used for working with JSON, and second from my library. In references we got required DLLs for Newton.json library and for my library. Then in usual execute method I actually got two requests. First to get scene item ID, because it's required to get item transform, and second is for getting transform itself. Here I store the connection ID, scene and source names. They will not change throughout the request, so I prefer them to be on the top. Let's look at the first request. Here we got request type, request data with our structure, we need scene name and source name, we can easily use our variables. Then we need to serialize it. Put it all as arguments in OBS send raw and get the response. It comes in the form of the string. I printed in logs so we can see it. Then we need to deserialize it. We can use deserialize object method. Just pass our response data structure to it and it will do parsing for us. And now we can simply store our item ID. Next, our get scene item transform request. Here we got request type, request data with our structure and populated required fields scene name and scene item ID, which we just got. Again, serialization, sending request and logging response, deserialization, storing our transform, and we can again easily access any fields. Now let's compile it, then run it and look at the logs. Here we can see the logs for our first request, complete response and our stored ID. And here is for second, full response with full transform structure, and for the selected fields. Now let's try and change position of our scene item. Right now, if we look at the transform, It's in the left bottom corner of the screen. Let's move it to the right top one, so we can actually see it. Let's look at the code. Again, required namespaces. Because we will need to access SceneItemTransform structure itself, we need our library root namespace. As I said earlier, all these kind of structures are stored under it. Here are usual variables for connection, scene and source names. Then again request to get scene's item ID. And here are requests to set transform. The request type. Request data structure requires as usual scene name and scene item ID. And here is our inner structure with transform. Full structure is much bigger as you can see here, but it's enough to just pass the fields which you want to change. So to move it, you just need to change position coordinates. I will also change the scale X, so it will mirror the image. As usual, serialize before send, sending request, and logging the response. Compile. Let's see it in action. And we can see our image changing its position. I hope you will find this library helpful and it will make working with OBS RAW a bit easier. I still need to add more documentation, well, documentation at all, but it's future me problem. Right now, you can watch me from the past in this video and learn how to use Streamer.Bot's global variables in C# code sub-action. And as always, have a good evening and bye-bye. Ow, it hurts.